Go ahead, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Usually when people talk about genetically modified foods, they'll talk about the advantages and if they outweigh the criticisms. The definition of genetically modified foods are foods that have been genetically altered to have qualities that make it easier to grow or harvest. Some of the advantages of genetically modified foods are that they resist pests, herbicides, disease, unfavorable weather, and more. Some of the bad things about it are that places that have genetically modified crops, some of the animals around there can die. And pesticides, or some of the bugs around there become pesticide resistant so that they can still get at some of the crops. And it can get cross-pollinated with other plants so that even if some farmers didn't want to have genetically modified crops, it'll cross-pollinate and they'll end up with genetically modified crops. And also some of the human problems that can happen. You can get new kinds of diseases that we don't know about yet because we haven't had genetically modified foods long enough to know how they affect people. What I'm going to talk about today, though, is the economic effects of the production and sale of genetically modified food, and that it will increase the gap between the rich and the poor. And this gap happens because of the raising prices of genetically modified food due to patents. And the maintenance of patents costs money, and the cost of labeling genetically modified food containers and keeping them separate from unaltered foods costs money as well. Many genetically modified foods are patented, and maintaining these patents is expensive because cross-pollination can happen not by choice. Like I said before, the farmers that didn't want to have genetically modified crops can get genetically modified crops just through cross-pollination. So one way to stop that is to put in a suicide gene into the crops. It's like a genetic code that causes the crops to die after one harvest season. So new seeds would have to be purchased every season in order to not have those seeds pollinate with other seeds. One study by the Soil Association investigated the United States genetic modified food costs, and it showed that these crops cause an increase in the cost of farming and a decrease in profit. Genetically modified foods cost 40% more an acre than natural foods. The most popular crops, soya and maize, which make up 83% of genetically modified crops, create less income than non-genetically modified crops. And because of the increase in prices of these crops, it would be harder for small farmers and local farmers and third world countries to get these crops. So they would have to get these through charity or other ways, or they wouldn't be able to get them at all, which would cause a gap between those countries that could afford it and those countries that couldn't. And for the labels of genetically modified foods, they would be more expensive because you have to keep those crops separate from other crops, and it would be more expensive because you wouldn't be able to mix them either. So, yeah. And because of these reasons, that they have to be patented and you have to maintain the patents and you have to keep them separate when you're labeling the cans and containers for these foods. It would increase the gap between the rich and the poor because some people wouldn't be able to afford them and others would.
All right, Lauren, I got an issue at the beginning because you've got a long setup of material, and I know that you're trying to set up what the controversy is. I don't think that it's quite as clear what the issue that you're talking about is. I know it's genetically modified foods, and you talk about you've got the list of positive and the negatives, but it takes you a minute and 20 seconds to get to what your claim is, which basically has to do with the patents and the problems that those are going to present for genetically modified foods. And that's a lot of time to go by before we know really what your claim is. Once you get to that point, things start to make a little bit more sense. You still need to have a clearer layout of what the secondary structure is. I think I did detect what the points were that you were talking about, but you want to signpost them much more clearly, especially at the beginning. If you didn't use numerical signposts later on in the body of the speech, that would not be a big deal as long as they were clear at the beginning, and then we're just hearing them a second time. I'm listening pretty carefully, so I was able to pick up at least one of those points when you got to it in the body of the speech. The second one I think I also picked out as well. Now, you did cite one study, and that was about cost, but it was a little confusing to me because it's not clear to me why it is that if these genetically modified seeds cost more and they're less productive or less profitable in the long run, why would anybody be using them? Why would anybody care about this issue? Why wouldn't they just continue to use the traditional seeds that are available to them? That's where your controversy needs to be explained more, and I didn't think that that was very clear. The whole issue about separating the seeds and keeping them in separate labels and separate containers, I still don't understand what that is about. Is that the responsibility of the farmers who purchase these seeds, and do they sign some kind of contract, and if they violate it, do they get punished or something along those lines? It's not very clear what's happening here. You had the one study that talked about the cost, and another study that said in the long run, or another site that you gave that said in the long run it could separate people who wouldn't be able to afford these things. I still don't know why anybody would want to be able to afford something that costs more and lowers their profits. That makes no sense to me at all, but I'm not an economist, so maybe there's some explanation for it. I do think that you have a tendency when you're speaking to drop your voice out whenever you seem uncertain about what it is you're saying, and I think that undermines your credibility a little bit. So I do like the topic. I thought that once you got to it, the claim is an interesting one, but it needs to be structured a little more clearly, and you need some more evidence on those points. You've got a lot of explanations, but the explanations don't always clarify where the controversy is. All right, thank you.